The first scream wasn't from a patient, but from a gurney careening into the ER bay, pushed by an orderly whose face was a mask of terror. Incoming, trauma, possible GSW. Sarah Jenkins, charge nurse of the Riverbend Hospital emergency room, didn't even flinch. It was 10 p.m. on a Saturday, which meant organized pandemonium was the baseline. The air already thrummed with the frantic symphony of beeping machines, urgent whispers, and the distant wail of incoming ambulances. At 38, Sarah had seen enough blood, guts, and bad decisions to last several lifetimes. Her eyes, usually a calm, steady blue, narrowed as she assessed the situation. She barked orders, her voice cutting through the din with practiced authority. "Dr. Chen, Bay 3, get a crash cart ready. I need vitals now." The patient, a young man, was already being transferred from the gurney to the bed in Trauma Bay 3. He was a mess. A nasty laceration above his left eye bled freely, and his shirt was torn, revealing an ugly bruise spreading rapidly across his ribs. But it wasn't the injuries that made Sarah pause. It was the look in his eyes. Despite the pain and fear, there was a flicker of something else. A disciplined resolve that seemed utterly out of place for someone in his condition. He looked like a soldier, even in his tattered civilian clothes. "Name?" Sarah asked, her hands already moving with precise efficiency, checking pupils, feeling for a pulse in his neck. "Thorne," he gasped, wincing as a sharp pain lanced through him. "Marcus Thorne." "All right, Marcus, we've got you. Just tell me what happened when you can." She cut his shirt away, revealing more bruises, some shaped suspiciously like boot marks. This wasn't just a fall, this was an assault. The ER doors, which usually hissed open and closed with a mundane sigh, suddenly burst inward with an aggressive thud. All conversation ceased. Every head snapped towards the entrance. 3 young men swaggered in, their faces flushed with alcohol and a predatory kind of glee. Their designer clothes were slightly disheveled, but their arrogance was pristine. "Where is he?" One of them, a blond guy with a sneer carved permanently into his face, slurred. His eyes, cold and entitled, swept across the bustling room, landing directly on Trauma Bay 3. "There he is! You little punk! You think you can just walk away from Logan Vance?" Sarah felt a cold knot of dread twist in her stomach. Logan Vance. The name alone carried weight in this city. A family of old money, powerful connections, and a reputation for shielding their golden boy from any actual consequences. The blonde, Logan, pointed a finger directly at Marcus. "Get him! We're not done with him yet!" The 2 others with him, equally inebriated and pumped up, started pushing past a bewildered security guard who seemed frozen, unable to comprehend the brazenness of the assault unfolding in an emergency room. "Hey, you can't be in here," the security guard finally stammered, his voice weak against their determined advance. But they weren't listening. Their eyes were fixed on Marcus. Dr. Chen, a petite resident, moved instinctively to block their path, but Logan merely shoved her aside with contemptuous ease. She stumbled, narrowly avoiding hitting her head on a medical cart. Sarah's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was a continuation of violence. Marcus, still half-conscious, tried to sit up, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and defiance. He looked vulnerable, a lamb to the slaughter. Without a second thought, Sarah moved. It wasn't a conscious decision, more like an instinct born of years spent protecting the defenseless. She planted herself squarely in front of Marcus's gurney, her back to the young cadet, her arms slightly spread, forming an unyielding barrier. "Stop right there." Her voice was surprisingly calm, yet it resonated with an iron will that brooked no argument. Her eyes, usually empathetic, now blazed with a fierce protectiveness. "This is a hospital. He is a patient. You will not touch him." Logan Vance stopped a foot in front of her, a smirk playing on his lips. He was taller than Sarah, broader, oozing a sense of privileged invincibility. "Oh, a little nurse thinks she's tough, huh? Get out of my way, lady. This doesn't concern you. It concerns me when you attempt to assault a patient under my care." Sarah shot back, her jaw set. "You take another step, and I will call the police." Logan let out a derisive laugh. "You think I care about the cops? My father will have you fired before you can even finish that call." His friends chuckled behind him, emboldened by his arrogance. "Try me," Sarah challenged, her voice low and dangerous. The smirk vanished from Logan's face, replaced by a flash of genuine anger. He hated being defied, especially by someone he clearly deemed beneath him. He took a step closer, raising his hand. "I said, get out of my way!" He shoved her. Hard. The force of the push was unexpected. Sarah stumbled backward, her head snapping around. The back of her skull connected with the sharp, unyielding edge of a stainless steel counter with a sickening thunk. A searing pain exploded behind her eyes, and white spots danced in her vision. For a moment, the ER spun. She tasted blood, warm and metallic, as a thin stream trickled down her temple. She swayed, her knees threatening to buckle, but a primal surge of adrenaline coursed through her veins. She felt Marcus stir behind her, heard a choked gasp of concern. That was all she needed. She straightened up, pushing through the nausea and the throbbing pain. Her vision cleared, revealing Logan Vance's shocked expression. He hadn't expected her to stay down. "You think that scares me?" Sarah rasped, her voice a little shaky, but her resolve unbroken. She wiped the blood from her temple with the back of her hand, smearing it across her cheek. The sight was startling. A streak of red against her pale skin, a testament to her unwavering defiance. "You think a little push is going to make me abandon my patient?" She took a defiant step forward, closing the small gap Logan had created. Her eyes, now blazing with righteous fury, met his. "You want him? You're going to have to go through me. And I promise you, Logan Vance, it won't be easy." The sheer, unadulterated defiance in her stance, the blood trickling from her head, seemed to finally penetrate Logan's drunken haze. His bravado faltered. The sight of a bleeding woman, standing her ground against him in a sterile hospital setting, was not the image he wanted. His friends, too, looked less amused and more unsettled. The situation was quickly spiraling beyond a simple bar fight. Suddenly, the wail of police sirens grew louder, closer, real police, not just the overwhelmed security guard. The sounds echoed through the ER, a harsh reality check. Logan's eyes darted towards the entrance, then back to Sarah. The sneer returned, but it was laced with something akin to panic. "This isn't over, nurse," he hissed, his face contorting in a promise of future retribution. "You made a big mistake." Then, with a final contemptuous glare, he turned and bolted, his two friends scrambling to follow him out the main doors just as the first uniformed officers burst in. Sarah watched them go, her chest heaving. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving her shaking and lightheaded. The ER, which had gone silent during the confrontation, erupted into murmurs of shock and concern. "Sarah, are you all right?" Dr. Chen rushed to her side, examining the cut on her head with worried eyes. "I'm fine," Sarah mumbled, though her knees felt like jelly. "Just make sure Marcus is okay." She finally allowed herself to lean back against the gurney, feeling the smooth, cold metal against her back. Marcus Thorne, his face pale and bruised, looked up at her, his eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher: gratitude, awe, and a deep, silent respect. He tried to speak, but she gently shushed him. "Rest, Marcus," she said, her voice softer now, the fierce adrenaline replaced by the steady calm of a nurse. "You're safe now." A police officer approached, notebook in hand, his face grim. "All right, nurse, we just missed them. Can you tell us exactly what happened?" Sarah nodded, taking a deep breath. The headache was already starting to throb, a constant reminder of the metallic taste in her mouth. But as she looked at Marcus, now being tended to by a flurry of medical staff, she knew she wouldn't have done anything differently. She was a nurse. She protected her patients. It was as simple and as complicated as that. The weight of the encounter settled on her. The act was over, but the consequences, she knew, were just beginning. She had just crossed a very powerful family, and Logan Vance's parting words echoed ominously in her mind. This wasn't over. The aftermath of the adrenaline was a dull, throbbing ache that settled behind Sarah's eyes and radiated down her neck. Dr. Chen, her brow furrowed with a mixture of anger and concern, meticulously cleaned the gash on Sarah's scalp. The antiseptic stung, a sharp counterpoint to the deeper pain. 3 stitches should do it," Dr. Chen said, her voice tight. "You're lucky, Sarah. A few inches lower and you could have had a serious concussion. What you did, it was incredibly brave, but stupid. Comes with the territory," Sarah murmured, wincing as the needle pierced her skin. She had patched up countless patients in this very room, but being on the receiving end was a disorienting experience. The familiar sounds of the ER seemed distant, filtered through a haze of exhaustion and pain. Her colleagues moved around her with a new kind of deference, their glances a mixture of awe and pity. They knew who Logan Vance was. They knew what this meant. An hour later, her head bandaged and a cup of lukewarm coffee in her hand, Sarah sat in a small, sterile consultation room. The door opened, and a man in a rumpled suit entered. He looked as weary as she felt, but his eyes held a cynical, world-weary edge that immediately put her on guard. "Nurse Jenkins? I'm Detective Miller," he said, not offering a handshake. He sank into the chair opposite her, pulling out a small, dog-eared notebook. "Got a few questions for you about the little scuffle tonight." The word scuffle landed with a thud. "It wasn't a scuffle, Detective." Sarah corrected him, her voice firm despite her exhaustion. "It was an assault. 3 men came in here to attack a patient, and they assaulted me when I intervened." Miller sighed, a long, put-upon sound, as if she were already making his life difficult. "Right. An assault. So, let's start from the beginning. This patient, Marcus Thorne, do you know him?" "Never seen him before tonight. So you have no idea what the original dispute was about?" he asked, scribbling something in his notebook. His penmanship was a frantic, illegible scrawl. "No. All I know is he was injured, and they were pursuing him." "Right. And you felt it was your responsibility to get involved?" The question was loaded, the implication clear. Sarah's patience, already worn thin, began to fray. "It's my responsibility to protect my patients. They were trying to harm him, in my ER. What was I supposed to do? Offer them a scalpel?" A corner of Miller's mouth twitched, a phantom of a smirk. "So you placed yourself between them. Did you say anything to provoke them? Get aggressive?" Sometimes in these situations, things can be misinterpreted. The sheer audacity of the question took her breath away. "Provoke them? Detective, one of them shoved me so hard my head hit a steel counter. I have 3 stitches to prove it. The only provocation was my refusal to let them beat a man who was already injured and helpless." Okay, calm down," he said, raising a placating hand. "Just trying to get all sides of the story. These other guys, the Vance kid and his friends, they were gone when we got here. Did you get a good look at the others?" "They were with Logan Vance. That's all I know." "Right, Logan Vance." Miller's pen stopped moving. He looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "You're sure about that name?" "Positive." He clicked his pen and shut his notebook. The interview felt incomplete, perfunctory. "All right, nurse, we'll look into it. You'll probably have to come down to the station to sign a formal statement in a day or 2. He stood up, tucking the notebook into his jacket pocket. "My advice? Ice your head and get some rest, and try to stay out of other people's fights." He left without another word. The room felt colder, emptier. His advice echoed in her ears, a casual dismissal of her courage, reframing her heroism as a foolish misstep. It wasn't just dismissive, it was a warning. The system wasn't on her side. This was the first cold wave of a tide she hadn't realized she was swimming against. The next morning, the call came. Not from the police, but from the hospital's administration. "Sarah, it's Mr. Davies. Can you be in my office at 10 o'clock, please?" The request was phrased politely, but it was an order. Mr. Davies' office was on the top floor, a world away from the controlled chaos of the ER. It was a space of plush carpets, dark wood, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. It was a room designed to project power and calm, and today it felt deeply menacing. Mr. Davies himself was a man who seemed to have been born in a tailored suit. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his smile professionally polished. He gestured for Sarah to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his massive desk. "Sarah," he began, his voice smooth as silk, "I've read the incident report from last night. It's concerning. A patient was assaulted in our ER, and so was I." "Yes, I'd say it's concerning," she replied, refusing to be intimidated. Davies steepled his fingers, his polished smile never wavering. "Indeed. But what concerns me, Sarah, is the liability. You physically engaged with visitors. You escalated a situation. Our hospital's policy is clear. In the event of a security threat, staff are to stand down and wait for the proper authorities. They were attacking a patient. There was no time to wait. Perhaps," he conceded, the word dripping with doubt. "But you must understand our position. The family of the young man in question, the Vance family they are, significant patrons of this hospital. Their contributions funded the entire pediatric wing. There it was. The other shoe, a Gucci loafer, had dropped. This wasn't about hospital policy. It was about money. So, because his father is rich, Logan Vance can just walk into our ER and assault people with impunity?" Sarah asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Of course not," Davies said, a little too quickly. "But we must be delicate. The Vances have a different perspective on the evening's events. They claim their son was merely trying to check on the condition of the other young man, Mr. Thorne, and that you were unnecessarily aggressive. Sarah stared at him, incredulous. They're lying. Truth is often a matter of perspective, Davies said, the platitude sounding obscene in this context. All I'm asking, Sarah, is for you to be a team player. When you give your official statement, perhaps you could soften the details. Frame it as a misunderstanding that got out of hand. No need to be overly dramatic. It would be better for everyone, for the hospital, and for your career, if this just went away. The threat was veiled, but it was there, hanging in the pristine air between them. Your career. He was telling her to trade her integrity for her job. Mr. Davies, Sarah said, standing up. The bandage on her head felt tight, a physical reminder of the truth he wanted her to bury. I became a nurse to help people, not to protect the reputation of a hospital or the feelings of its wealthy donors. I will tell the police exactly what happened. The truth. Davies' smile finally faltered. A flicker of cold annoyance crossed his face. I think you'll find that the truth is a very expensive commodity, Nurse Jenkins. Be careful you can afford it. The walk back to her car was a blur. The betrayal stung more than the stitches. It was one thing to be assaulted by a spoiled brat. It was another to be told by your employer that your safety and the truth were secondary to a donation. She felt isolated, a lone voice against a chorus of powerful interests. She was home for less than an hour when her phone rang again. It was an unknown number. Jenkins? She answered, her tone clipped. Nurse Jenkins, it's Detective Miller again. His voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. Something's come up. I thought you should know. Logan Vance's father, the attorney? He's filed a complaint. Sarah sank onto her sofa, a feeling of unreality washing over her. A complaint? Against who? Against you, nurse. She couldn't speak. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it was breathtaking. Miller continued, his voice a droning monotone. According to their statement, Mr. Thorne was the aggressor in an earlier altercation. Logan Vance and his friends came to the hospital out of concern. They allege that you were hysterical, possibly intoxicated, and physically assaulted Mr. Vance when he tried to approach Mr. Thorne's bed. They say the injury to your head was self-inflicted, that you slipped and hit the counter in your rage. The lie was so grotesque, so completely inverted from reality, that for a moment, Sarah could only laugh. It was a bitter, hollow sound that filled her small living room. Intoxicated? Hysterical? Self-inflicted? It was a narrative straight out of a villain's playbook, designed to discredit and destroy her. Detective, that is the most insane thing I have ever heard, she finally managed to say. Look, I'm not here to judge, Miller said, though his tone suggested he already had. I'm just telling you what the official story is now. This just went from a simple assault case to a he said, she said. It's a mess. My lieutenant is already telling me to treat both claims with equal weight. Equal weight? Sarah's voice rose, a tremor of fury running through it. I am a registered nurse. I was at my job, sober, doing my duty. He is a rich kid with a history of getting into trouble. How can you possibly give his story equal weight? That's the system, nurse, Miller said, and for the first time, a hint of something, was it pity, or just deep-seated cynicism, entered his voice. People like the Vances, they know how to make it work for them. You're going to have to come down to the station tomorrow, 10 a.m., don't be late. He hung up. Sarah sat in the silence, the phone still pressed to her ear. The walls of her cozy apartment suddenly felt like they were closing in. It wasn't just Logan Vance she was up against. It was his father, his father's money, her own hospital's administration, and a police department that seemed all too willing to accept a convenient lie over a difficult truth. She had been shielded by a belief in the inherent goodness of the systems she worked with in medicine, law enforcement. She believed that if you did the right thing, you would be protected. That belief was now shattered, its shards glittering coldly at her feet. She was alone, and the storm was just beginning. The rage started then, a slow, simmering burn in the pit of her stomach. They weren't just trying to get away with a crime. They were trying to make her the criminal, and they were just getting started. The official email arrived the next morning. It was cold, clinical, and reeked of corporate jargon. Dear Miss Jenkins, it began. In light of the recent security incident and the subsequent external complaints filed, you are hereby placed on paid administrative leave, effective immediately, pending the outcome of a full internal investigation. Paid leave. It was meant to sound like a courtesy, but Sarah knew what it was. a muzzle, a way to get her out of the hospital, away from her supportive colleagues, and to isolate her while the gears of power turned against her. The email ended with a curt directive. You are not to enter hospital premises or contact any active staff members regarding this matter until the investigation is concluded. She was being boxed in, cut off from her herd. Her phone buzzed with a few tentative texts from her ER work friends. Heard what happened? Davies is a snake. Thinking of you. Don't let them get to you, Sarah. We know the truth. The support was a small comfort, but she knew it was fleeting. Each message was tinged with fear. They had jobs to protect, families to feed. They couldn't afford to stand with her in the open. She was on her own. The isolation she'd felt after Detective Miller's call began to solidify, hardening from a vague unease into a cold, heavy certainty. 2 days later, she was summoned to the hospital's administrative building for a meeting. Not Davies's plush office this time, but a soulless, windowless boardroom on a lower floor. The air was stale, the lighting a flat, unflattering fluorescent glare. A long, polished table reflected the dull ceiling panels like a dark, still lake. Mr. Davies was there, looking uncomfortable and avoiding her gaze. Beside him sat a woman in a severe gray suit with a face that seemed incapable of smiling. She introduced herself as Eleanor Albright, the hospital's chief legal counsel. She had the eyes of a shark that had long forgotten the taste of anything but blood. "Thank you for coming, Miss Jenkins," Albright began, her voice as starched as her blouse. "We are here to discuss a resolution to the unfortunate events of Saturday evening." Before Sarah could respond, a large monitor on the wall flickered to life. A man's face appeared, sharp and patrician, with silver-streaked hair and an expression of supreme confidence. He was in a lavish, wood-paneled office, a wall of leather-bound law books behind him. Arthur Vance. He didn't look like a father concerned for his son. He looked like a king surveying his domain. "Miss Jenkins," he said, his voice a low, resonant purr that was somehow more menacing than a shout. "I am Arthur Vance. I trust we can handle this matter with a minimum of unpleasantness." Sarah's spine stiffened. "Mr. Vance, your son assaulted a patient and then assaulted me. I'm not sure there's a pleasant way to resolve that." Vance smiled, a tight, bloodless motion of his lips. "Perspective is a fascinating thing. My son, Logan, and his friends maintain that they were the victims of an unprovoked attack by Mr. Thorne and then a subsequent, and frankly bizarre, display of aggression from you." "That's a lie, and you know it," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the hammer of her pulse against her ribs. Albright, the hospital lawyer, cleared her throat. "Sarah, let's maintain a professional tone. Mr. Vance is merely outlining the official complaint that has been filed." It was a clear signal. The hospital was not on her side. Albright was not her lawyer. She was the hospital's shield. Arthur Vance leaned forward, his eyes on the screen seeming to bore right through her. "We've done a bit of research on you, Sarah. May I call you Sarah? You've been at Riverbend for 7 years. Before that, a 2-year stint at a clinic in Poughkeepsie. You left that position rather abruptly, didn't you?" Sarah's blood ran cold. "I left for a better opportunity. Our records suggest you left following a disagreement with a supervising doctor over patient protocol," Vance continued smoothly, as if reading from a script. "A disagreement where, according to a note in your file, you were described as insubordinate and overly emotional. It was a gross mischaracterization of a legitimate dispute she'd had over a doctor's dangerous prescription order, an incident where she had ultimately been proven right. But he twisted it, painting a picture of a hot-headed, unstable employee. This was his strategy. Not to refute the facts of Saturday night, but to demolish the credibility of the person reporting them. "You're single, I believe?" Vance went on, the question a casual, yet deeply invasive, jab. "No children. Your work is your life, isn't it? It's admirable, in its own way. But for some, that level of dedication can lead to high stress, a blurring of professional boundaries, a tendency to overreact." Mr. Davies shifted in his seat, his gaze fixed on a pen he was turning over and over in his hands. He was a willing, silent accomplice to her character assassination. "What does my personal life have to do with anything?" Sarah demanded, her voice shaking with a rage she was struggling to contain. "It speaks to a pattern," Vance said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "The pattern of a lonely, overworked woman who perhaps saw an opportunity for drama, for heroism. A woman who inserted herself into a situation she didn't understand and is now trapped in a narrative she can't control. It was masterful. It was vile. He was erasing her, replacing the competent, dedicated nurse with a caricature of a hysterical spinster. Now, Vance said, his tone shifting from faux psychologist to executioner, let's talk about your nursing license. The State Board of Nursing takes complaints of professional misconduct very seriously, especially complaints involving aggression, instability, and, as my son's sworn statement claims, the appearance of being under the influence of an unknown substance. The room fell silent. That was the kill shot. An accusation like that, even if baseless, could trigger an investigation that would hang over her career for years, potentially ending it for good. Her ability to earn a living, the very core of her identity, was now being held hostage. We believe, however, Vance said magnanimously, that a lengthy and reputation-destroying public battle is in no one's best interest. Albright slid a folder across the table towards Sarah. The Vance family and the hospital have come to a mutual agreement, she said. This is a settlement offer. It includes a payment of $25,000 for your troubles. Sarah opened the folder. Inside was a check, already made out to her, and a multi-page document. That is a standard, non-disclosure agreement, Albright explained, and a revised statement. You will sign both. The statement clarifies that the events of Saturday night were a misunderstanding, that your injury was accidental, and that you retract any and all accusations against Logan Vance and his friends. In return, the Vance family will withdraw their complaint with the police and the nursing board, and the hospital will conclude its internal investigation, allowing you to return to your duties. Sarah stared at the documents. $25,000. 30 pieces of silver to buy her silence, her integrity. They weren't just asking her to lie. They were asking her to actively participate in the destruction of the truth, to become an accomplice to their fiction. They wanted her to put her name on a document that validated their gaslighting and painted her as the unstable one. It was a form of psychological torture designed to break her down and make her compliant. She looked from the check to the smirking face of Arthur Vance on the screen, to the impassive mask of Eleanor Albright, to the cowardly, downcast eyes of Mr. Davies. They were a triumvirate of corruption, each playing their part. The powerful bully, the cynical enabler, and the spineless bureaucrat. They thought they had her trapped. They had taken her job, threatened her license, and assassinated her character. They assumed that, like everyone else, she had a price. A strange calm settled over Sarah. The fear and the shaking were gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. She had been a nurse for 15 years. She had held the hands of the dying, comforted, grieving families, and fought to save lives against impossible odds. She had been covered in sweat, blood, and tears. Her integrity was the only thing she truly owned, the bedrock on which her entire life was built, and they thought they could buy it for the price of a mid-sized sedan. Slowly, deliberately, she slid the folder back across the table. She looked directly into the camera, her gaze meeting the digital eyes of Arthur Vance. No, she said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the silent room with the force of a thunderclap. Vance's smile vanished. I beg your pardon? I said no. Sarah repeated, her voice gaining strength. I will not sign your lies. I will not sell my integrity, and I will not be intimidated. You can keep your money. Take your complaint to the nursing board. I will tell them the truth. I will tell the police the truth, and I will tell anyone who will listen the truth. Your son is a violent criminal, and you are a pathetic bully trying to buy him out of trouble. But you can't buy me. She stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. We're done here. She turned and walked out of the room, not waiting for a response. She didn't look back. Her heart was pounding, but for the first time in days, she felt a sense of control. She had faced them down and chosen herself. The consequences came faster than she could have imagined. That evening, her friend texted her a link with a single word. Unbelievable. She clicked it. It was a local online tabloid, the Hudson Valley Herald. The headline was plastered across the top of the page. Riverbend nurse's violent outburst. Hospital donor's son accuses staffer of unhinged attack. Beneath it was a grainy, unflattering photo of her from her employee ID, her eyes wide, her expression deer in the headlights. The article was a masterpiece of slander. It quoted anonymous sources within the hospital who described her as high-strung and prone to confrontation. It detailed Arthur Vance's version of the story, framing Logan as a concerned citizen who became the victim of a public servant's meltdown. It even mentioned her abrupt departure from her previous job. The final paragraph was the most cutting. While we commend the difficult work our healthcare professionals do, this incident raises serious questions about the mental stability of those we entrust with our care. Sarah stared at the screen, her own face looking back at her, twisted into the mask of a villain. They had done it. They had made good on their threat. Her name, her face, her reputation, all of it was being publicly shredded, fed to the masses as sordid entertainment. The rage that had been simmering in her stomach now roared to life, a white-hot inferno. They had pushed her to the absolute edge. She was jobless, alone, and now publicly disgraced. She was at the bottom, and she had no idea how she was ever going to climb her way back up. Miles away, within the hallowed stone walls of the United States Military Academy at West Point, a different kind of truth was taking root. Cadet Marcus Thorne sat on the edge of a stiff bed in the post infirmary, his ribs taped so tightly it felt like a corset. The bruises on his face had started to fade from a shocking purple to a mottled yellow-green, but the injury that truly pained him wasn't physical. It was the wound to his sense of honor. He had given his official statement to his tactical officer, Captain Eva Rostova, a formidable woman with a gaze that could chip granite. He recounted every detail of the assault, his voice never wavering. But when he spoke of Sarah Jenkins, the nurse who had stood between him and his attackers, who had taken a blow meant for him, his voice cracked with a raw, unshielded emotion. "She didn't know me, ma'am," Marcus said, his eyes fixed on his clasped hands. "She had no reason to get involved. They threatened her, and they hurt her, and she still didn't back down. And now they're trying to destroy her for it." He had seen the article from the Hudson Valley Herald. A fellow cadet had shown it to him on a tablet, and the injustice of it had made him physically ill. The lies were so blatant, so perfectly crafted to defame the one person who had shown him courage and decency. Captain Rostova listened, her expression unreadable. West Point did not officially involve itself in the civilian affairs of its cadets unless a serious crime was committed by the cadet. But the Corps of Cadets was more than just a military institution. It was a living, breathing organism with a fiercely protective immune system, and that system was beginning to activate. The story spread, not like idle gossip, but like a vital piece of intelligence. It moved through the mess hall over breakfast trays, whispered in the barracks during late-night study sessions, and circulated on the training fields between grueling drills. The official cadet leader development system ensured a rigid chain of command, but information, especially information that struck at the heart of their shared values of duty, honor, and country, flowed through unofficial channels with astonishing speed. Marcus was one of their own. He was known as a solid, dependable cadet, the kind of quiet leader who would one day be trusted with the lives of soldiers. His word was his bond. When Marcus Thorne said a thing was true, the Corps believed it. The narrative of the unstable nurse was met with cold contempt. Cadets, trained to analyze threats and assess character, saw the lie for what it was: a cowardly tactic employed by the wealthy and corrupt. The Vances had made a critical error. They assumed they were fighting a lone, isolated woman. They failed to understand that by attacking Marcus and the nurse who protected him, they had picked a fight with the entire Long Gray Line. The idea began quietly, a murmur in one of the companies of the 4th Regiment. A senior cadet, a regimental commander with a reputation for bold thinking, posed a question to his peers. "We can't protest. That's not what we do. But Mr. Thorne's honor, and the honor of the civilian who protected him, has been publicly attacked. Is standing by and doing nothing an acceptable course of action?" The answer was a resounding, unspoken no. A plan was formulated, one that adhered to the letter of their regulations while shattering their spirit. They would not protest. They would not issue a statement. They would simply visit. It was a cadet's privilege to use their weekend leave as they saw fit. If a significant number of them chose to use that leave to travel to the same quiet suburban street in their full dress gray uniforms, that was their prerogative. It was a show of respect, a vigil, an act of solidarity so profound it would require no words. Permission for off-post travel was requested through official channels for morale and welfare. The requests came in by the hundreds. Captains like Rostova saw the flood of paperwork and understood immediately what was happening. A quiet, knowing look passed between the officers. No one stood in the way. They approved the requests one after another, turning a blind eye to the obvious coordination. This was the Corps policing its own sense of honor, and it was a force of nature best left unimpeded. Sarah was adrift in a sea of digital venom. For 2 days, she had barely left her small apartment, the curtains drawn against the world. Her phone was a constant source of torment. Some numbers she recognized as local news outlets, Others were unknown, likely trolls who had gotten her number from the depths of the internet. The comments on the Herald article were a cesspool of cruelty, calling her a psycho, a liar, a disgrace. She sat on her couch, a cold cup of tea on the coffee table beside her, scrolling through the hateful words, a kind of numb self-flagellation. She felt utterly, completely alone. Every institution she had trusted had abandoned her. The lie had become the truth, and she was the villain in a story she never wrote. She was at the absolute bottom, the weight of the injustice pressing down on her, crushing the air from her lungs. Her landline, a relic she kept mostly for her elderly mother, rang. She ignored it. It rang again, insistent. With a sigh of resignation, she picked it up. "Hello? Sarah? It's Martha, from next door." Her neighbor sounded breathless, almost frantic. "Honey, you need to look outside. Right now." "Martha, I'm not really in the mood for." "No, you don't understand," Martha insisted, her voice high with excitement. "Just look out your front window." More reporters? A protest organized by the Vances to harass her? Wearily, Sarah padded over to the window and pulled back a corner of the curtain. What she saw didn't make sense. A young man, no older than 20, was standing on the sidewalk across the street. He was ramrod straight, his posture perfect, and he was wearing a gray uniform with a high collar and white trim, a West Point Cadet. He was just standing there, at attention, looking at her house. Confused, she let the curtain fall. Maybe he was a friend of Marcus's, sent to offer support? She was about to turn away when her doorbell rang, a single, polite chime. Hesitantly, she opened the door a crack. A different cadet stood on her porch, equally formal, his white-gloved hands held perfectly at his sides. He was a senior, his sleeves adorned with the chevrons of a cadet captain. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm and respectful. "Cadet Captain Miller. On behalf of the Corps of Cadets, we wanted to pay our respects. We heard what you did for Cadet Thorne." Sarah's mind struggled to process his words. "The Corps?" He simply nodded toward the street. "It would be our honor if you would join us." She pulled the door fully open and stepped outside. The world tilted on its axis. It wasn't just one cadet, or two, it was hundreds. Her quiet, tree-lined suburban street, a place of minivans and manicured lawns, had been transformed. As far as the eye could see in both directions, cadets stood in silent, perfect formations. They lined the sidewalks, 3 deep, a sea of gray and white. They were utterly still, their faces forward, their expressions a mixture of youthful solemnity and fierce resolve. Down the block, she could see a line of chartered buses, their doors open. The silence was the most powerful thing. There were no signs, no chants, no angry shouts. There was only the quiet, overwhelming presence of the United States Corps of Cadets, standing as a single, unified body. Their discipline was their message. Their presence was their protest. Their silence was a roar of defiance against the lies that had been shouted about her. The handful of reporters who had been camped out on her lawn, hoping for a tearful soundbite, were now utterly dumbfounded. They scrambled, cameras swiveling, microphones turning away from her door and toward the breathtaking spectacle. Their sleazy narrative about an unstable nurse had just been publicly and powerfully obliterated by a story of honor, loyalty, and courage. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, hot and unstoppable. They streamed down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of profound, soul-shattering relief. A wave of gratitude so immense it buckled her knees washed over her. She wasn't alone. She had never been alone. She had an army at her back. In his gleaming top-floor office, Mr. Davies was watching the breaking news feed on his computer, his mouth agape. The polished corporate calm he so carefully curated had shattered. On the screen, aerial footage from a news helicopter showed the sheer scale of the gathering, a river of gray uniforms flowing through a civilian neighborhood. His phone began to ring, the display showing the chairman of the board. He let it go to voicemail. Across town, Detective Miller sat in his unmarked car, looking at the same images on his phone. A knot of dread tightened in his gut. He had taken the easy path, accepted the convenient story from the powerful family. Now, the moral authority of West Point was silently and publicly declaring that he had been on the wrong side of the truth. His simple, messy case had just become a national incident. Sarah stood on her small porch, flanked by the cadet captain, and looked out at the faces of the young men and women standing vigil for her. They were strangers, yet in that moment, they were her family, her defenders, her vindication. The weight that had been crushing her for days began to lift, replaced by a fierce, soaring hope. The tide had not just turned, it had become a tsunami, and it was about to wash away all the lies. The image of the silent, gray-clad army standing vigil on a suburban street was more potent than any lawyer's argument or politician's speech. It became the defining image of the week, playing on a continuous loop on national news networks. The narrative was no longer a messy he said, she said. It was a clear, stark story of honor versus corruption, of integrity versus influence. And the nation had chosen its side. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for those who had wagered against Sarah's character. The district attorney's office, which had previously dismissed the case as a minor altercation, was buried under an avalanche of public outrage. Within 24 hours, the DAA held a press conference on the courthouse steps, his face grim, announcing that his office was pursuing a full-scale criminal investigation into Logan Vance and his associates. He used words like unacceptable, thorough, and justice, all of which were conspicuously absent just days before. At Riverbend Hospital, the board of directors convened an emergency meeting. Mr. Davies was summoned, not for his counsel, but for his condemnation. The public relations nightmare was untenable. He was forced to issue a public apology, read from a script with trembling hands, praising Nurse Jenkins for her exemplary courage and promising a complete overhaul of the hospital's security and complaint procedures. It was a humiliating reversal, a corporate coward being sacrificed to save the institution. He was quietly pushed into an early retirement a week later. Detective Miller was officially removed from the case and placed on administrative duty pending an internal affairs investigation into his handling of the initial complaint. His cynical, lazy approach to justice had been exposed on a national stage, and the department had no choice but to make an example of him. Arthur Vance, for the first time in his life, found himself utterly powerless. His wealth and connections, the tools he had used to bully and bribe his way through the world, were useless against the monolithic court of public opinion. His attempts to plant counter-narratives were laughed out of newsrooms. He was a shark stranded in a desert. 2 days after the cadet's visit, Logan Vance and his 2 friends were arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including assault and witness intimidation. The images of the arrogant young men being led away in handcuffs were a cathartic balm for the entire city. For Sarah, the world had been turned right side up again. The hospital board formally expunged her record, dissolved the sham investigation, and sent her a letter of profound apology, begging her to return to her post as charge nurse. The true culmination of her vindication, however, came a month later, under the crisp blue sky of an autumn afternoon. She received a formal invitation to the United States Military Academy at West Point. The ceremony was held on the plain, the vast parade ground that served as the Academy's sacred heart. The entire corps of cadets stood in formation, a breathtaking spectacle of discipline and tradition. Sarah stood on a dais beside the Academy's superintendent, a 3-star general with a chest full of medals, and felt a sense of awe that eclipsed everything else she had experienced. The general presented her with the Academy's Civilian Award for Public Service, a medal reserved for those who demonstrated extraordinary courage and character in service to the community. In a world that too often rewards the powerful over the principled, the general's voice boomed across the field. Nurse Sarah Jenkins reminded us what true honor looks like. She did not hesitate. She did not waver. When she saw one of our own in peril, she became a shield. She represents the very values of courage, of selfless service that we strive to instill in every cadet in the long gray line. As he pinned the medal to her blouse, the thousands of cadets before her erupted in a single, unified wave of applause. It was a sound that washed over her, cleansing the last vestiges of the doubt and fear she had endured. After the ceremony, a young cadet in his immaculate dress gray uniform approached her, a slight limp, the only remaining evidence of his ordeal. It was Marcus Thorne. His face was healed, and his eyes were bright with a gratitude that needed no words. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I never properly thanked you." "You don't have to, Marcus," Sarah said, her own voice gentle. "Anyone would have done the same." "No, ma'am," he corrected her softly, his gaze unwavering. "They wouldn't have, but you did." Months later, Sarah was back where she belonged, in the controlled chaos of the Riverbend ER. The symphony of beeping machines and urgent voices was the same, but she was different. The slight weariness in her eyes was gone, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. Her colleagues looked at her with a new level of respect, not just as a competent nurse, but as the moral compass of their institution. A young, terrified resident fumbled a procedure, and Sarah was at her side in an instant, her hands steady, her voice calm and reassuring, guiding her through it. She was a protector. It was who she was. The ordeal hadn't broken her. It had forged her. It had revealed that the courage of a single, ordinary person, when faced with an undeniable wrong, could be the spark that ignites an army and reminds the world that integrity is a fortress that no amount of money or power can ever truly conquer.